It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Detention, probably for life, in a secure hospital for the man who stabbed 3 people to death in Nottingham, leaving a legacy of pain.
Your sickening crimes both shocked the nation and wrecked the lives of your surviving victims and the families of them all.
Those families united in grief and in anger at the missed opportunities to stop the killer by mental health services and the police.
You have blood on your hands. If you had just done your job properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
Also tonight, pressure on former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon as expletive-filled messages to her Chief of Staff are shown to the COVID inquiry, branding Boris Johnson a clown. In Alabama, a countdown to an execution using nitrogen gas for the first time, which critics say is cruel and experimental. We report from the slums of the Filipino capital and hear claims of police paying guns for hire to do their dirty work. The 2,000-year-old body in the bog. Well-preserved remains of a teenage boy are recovered from Peat Bogland in Northern Ireland. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. Grace O'Malley-Kumar, Barnaby Webber, Ian Coates. 3 lives lost on the streets of Nottingham. 3 families today united in grief after their loved one's killer was sentenced to be detained at a high-security hospital, probably for the rest of his life. United too in anger, accusing the authorities of missed opportunities to catch Valdo Calocane, who has paranoid schizophrenia, with Barnaby's mother saying that the police have got blood on their hands. There was also dismay that Calocane was allowed to enter a plea of manslaughter, with Ian Coates' son saying that he had got away with murder. The Attorney General will now review the sentence. Becky Cottrell reports from Nottingham on how a tragedy unfolded in the city last June.
The 2 people you can see here are university students, friends, walking home from a night out. It's likely the 19-year-olds are chatting about their evening or their shared love of sports. Nothing out of the ordinary, but that's about to change. Someone is waiting for them. Grace O'Malley-Kumar and Barnaby Webber were killed on a mild summer's evening 200 metres from home. Between them, they were stabbed over 30 times. You wouldn't think it, but the man casually walking along here has just knifed the teenagers to death and left their bodies in the street. Valdo Calocane, a paranoid schizophrenic, says voices in his head told him to do it, and he was preparing to strike again. This is how the police were alerted that there was a killer on the loose.
Oh no.
It's emergency. What's the emergency?
Yes, there's been a stabbing on Wilkinson Road. There's somebody lying in the street. I think they're dead. Oh, that was awful.
Whereabouts on Ilkeston Road, please?
Outside the old Wilbon building, near the crossroads.
Calocane then attempted to climb into the window of a homeless hostel. The resident inside punched the intruder, unaware of what he'd done, and was determined to do again. Redirecting, Calocane saw a van on the road. The driver was school caretaker Ian Coates on his way to work. Calocane stopped him, stabbed him 15 times and stole his van, leaving him for dead. What happened next is too graphic to show. He hit a pedestrian. Witnesses say they saw the man thrown 6 feet into the air like a rag doll. Incredibly, Wayne Burkitt survived, but admits the injuries he suffered left him wondering whether he'd be better off dead. And Calocane wasn't finished. He then tried to run over 2 more people. Marcin Goronsky and Sharon Miller were also extremely lucky to survive. Minutes later, he was stopped by police and tasered, still clutching the dagger he'd used to kill 3 strangers. He would go on to answer no comment when repeatedly questioned in custody. Today, a judge told Calocane he's likely to spend the rest of his life in a psychiatric hospital.
You believed at the time of your offences that the voices were controlling you and they had the power to harm your family if you failed to comply with their orders. And notwithstanding the treatment you've since received at Ashworth, you still labour under the strong impression that the voices are real, and you still believe that you do not suffer from any mental disorder whatsoever.
The families of Barnaby, Grace and Ian are united in their grief and anger.
This man has made a mockery of the system and he has got away with murder.
We will never come to terms with the loss of our beloved daughter Grace and how she lost her life. Her heroic actions, she was a gift to us.
And a shocking revelation they had to address. When Calocane killed those they loved, there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest.
To the Assistant Chief Constable, Rob Griffin, who finally released this information publicly yesterday, I say this: you have blood on your hands. If you had just done your jobs properly, there's a very good chance my beautiful boy would be alive today.
That allegation following this explanation.
He did assault an emergency worker. He has assaulted work colleagues, and I would say that they are relatively low-level assaults. So actually, when you examine his behaviour and the things that he said and he did, it is very obvious that he had mental health challenges, but I don't think there was anything that is obvious to be seen that would indicate that he might go on and do what he did on June the 13th last year.
Bereaved and broken, they definitely don't agree. And as they continue to grieve, these families say they're still fighting for justice. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Nottingham Crown Court.
Well, perhaps the most powerful comment of the day was the one you've just heard from Barnaby Webber's mother, Emma, that the police have blood on their hands for their failures in dealing with Valdo Calocane. Sky's Becky Johnson has been looking in more detail at those failures and how they form part of a much wider problem.
He was known to be violent, dangerous and mentally ill. So why was Valdo Calocane free to roam the streets, armed with a knife, killing at random? It's a question that haunts the victims' families.
Missed opportunities to divert his lethal path will forever play on our minds, and this requires further review. We will look for answers regarding missed opportunities to intervene and prevent this horrendous crimes.
There were so many warnings. Over 4 years of deteriorating mental health, Calocane carried out a series of assaults. One young woman even jumped out of a window to escape him. Police and the NHS knew. In fact, at the time of the killings, there was a warrant out for his arrest for assaulting an officer. But police are refusing to take the full blame for what was multi-agency failure.
I would like to see mental health services now step forward when the time is appropriate and right and say this is what we could and should have done.
The NHS say they had made multiple attempts to contact him, but serious questions remain. Calocane had simply slipped through the net of the authorities, meaning unmonitored and unmedicated, he was able to carry out the brutal killings here. And this case is far from unique. A shocking number of people die at the hands of killers with serious mental illness who the authorities have failed to detain or section until it's too late. After Julian Hendy's father, Philip, was killed by a paranoid schizophrenic in 2007, he began supporting other families.
I discovered that over 100 to 120 families each and every year across the UK are killed by a person with severe mental illness.
Why are lessons not learned?
People try and work on the principle of least restriction, so they're not assertive enough, and they work on the basis of what the patient wants, rather than what the public would protect the public sometimes.
Jacob Billington was stabbed to death in Birmingham in 2020. His best friend, Michael Callahan, left permanently disabled. Their attacker had schizophrenia.
Somebody that dangerous, unless they're running around with a machete, is not going to be sectioned. And it seems to me to be that bar is just incredibly high, and that's something that needs to be looked at as well.
Calocane will likely now be detained for the rest of his life. But how many more dangerous, seriously ill people like him remain on the streets of Britain?
And Becky joins me now live from Nottingham. Becky, so many lessons from the past that obviously weren't learned. Do you get the sense that anything might be different this time?
Well, the Prime Minister has declined to say whether he'll order a public inquiry into what happened here in Nottingham, but he has said all relevant agencies do need to look back and see if lessons can be learned. When you speak to families who've lost loved ones at the hands of killers who have mental illness, the one thing that you hear time and time again is that they feel that lessons aren't learned. They feel that the system favours the rights of patients over the responsibility to keep the public safe. And they feel that too often agencies don't communicate effectively, so important information isn't shared and the consequences can be fatal. Now, what they would like to see is change, and I think one thing that we can be guaranteed of is the anger of the families of the victims here in Nottingham. They will not stop fighting for answers for their loved ones, and they will want to see real change as a result of what happened here so that other families don't have to suffer like they're doing.
Becky Johnson there with the latest from Nottingham. Becky, thank you. Now, the COVID inquiry has already exposed the crude language used by the political class in Westminster. Well, today we discovered that Edinburgh was not much different, with WhatsApp messages revealing that Scotland's then First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, described Boris Johnson as, in her words, an effing clown, whose government's communications were effing excruciating. The evidence comes amid ongoing scrutiny over messages exchanged by ministers and officials during COVID, as our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis now reports. And a warning that there is some flash photography coming up.
This is what lockdown looked like. A period of pain, a period of loss, a period no one will ever forget.
4 years on, this is the time for questions and answers from Scotland's First Minister, who was Health Secretary at the time. The first glimpse into the government engine room at the time.
I swear by Almighty God.
Appearing at an inquiry now engulfed in a scandal after it emerged Nicola Sturgeon wiped her WhatsApps.
Let me unreservedly apologise to this inquiry, but also to those who are mourning the loss of a loved one that was bereaved by COVID for the government's, frankly, poor handling of the various Rule 9 requests in relation to informal messages. There's no excuse for it.
Here is the former First Minister with her then Chief of Staff Liz Lloyd. Messages between the duo are missing during the first lockdown. Some, like the night Boris Johnson announced a second wave of national restrictions, were kept. Here's what Miss Sturgeon said.
This is excruciating. Their comms are awful. Then she goes on to say, his utter incompetence in every sense is now offending me on behalf of politicians everywhere. You reply saying, I have a separate WhatsApp with, and the name's redacted, and Davy, and we are offended on behalf of spads everywhere. Nicola Sturgeon says, he is a clown.
Hi, Nicola, how are you doing?
Lloyd was one half of a powerful pair, telling Nicola Sturgeon she wanted a rammy with Westminster over furlough to avoid having to think about sick people.
Ms Lloyd, is it a betrayal that Nicola Sturgeon has deleted all of her WhatsApps?
I've said my piece to the inquiry. That's the appropriate place to answer the questions, and I've nothing further to add.
Is it a betrayal, though, that people have died and there is no record of your informal messages between you and the First Minister?
Well, there is. I've just provided it to the inquiry.
There are months missing.
I have answered the questions of the inquiry. That's the responsibility. I've set out my piece to the inquiry. I hope that is helpful to everyone who is looking for answers, and I have completed my task.
First Minister.
He, though, may not have completed his task, and neither has the headline act Nicola Sturgeon, who arrives at this inquiry on Wednesday in what could be her toughest test yet. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Edinburgh.
Let's go to the US now, where tonight the state of Alabama will try to put an inmate to death using nitrogen gas. The state claims the killing of 58-year-old Kenneth Eugene Smith will be humane, but the method is untested. In fact, it's the first attempt to use a new execution method since the introduction of the lethal injection back in 1982. Well, let's go live to our U.S. correspondent, Martha Kellner. Martha, this is proving highly controversial. Why are they doing this? Why are they introducing a new method for the first time since the 80s?
It's highly controversial, Barbara, and if all goes to plan as put forth by the state of Alabama, in just under 2 hours' time, Kenneth Eugene Smith will die in a way that no other man or woman in America ever has done before. He'll be executed using nitrogen gas. It is an untested method. He is essentially a guinea pig. Just to give you the specifics, he will be strapped to a gurney. He will have a mask placed over his face, and for a period of 5 or 15 minutes, depending on how quickly he dies, a lethal amount of this nitrogen gas will be pumped in to that mask. His lawyers have argued it is a cruel and unusual punishment. There are also concerns that the mask method, may mean that oxygen seeps into that mask. It prolongs his suffering. Death row opponents say it means he could even choke on his own vomit during this execution. Smith has already endured one failed execution attempt. In November 2022, he was strapped to a gurney for 4 hours while an executioner attempted to find a vein in his body to administer a lethal injection. It is that botched attempt at an execution and several others in Alabama that the state says that they are looking, that means the state says they are looking for new methods of execution. They also say there is a shortage of the drugs used to administer these lethal injections, but it is highly controversial, of course. It's 34 years now since Kenneth Smith was convicted of the murder of a pastor's wife. He was given $1,000 along with 2 other men to kill that woman. His execution, if it does take place today, there is one pending appeal. If it does take place, it could open a new frontier, Barbara, in the way that states execute death row prisoners.
Our US correspondent Martha Kellner. Martha, thank you. The NHS is facing more strikes after senior doctors in England narrowly voted against the government's latest pay offer. The British Medical Association says 51.1% turned down the offer and is not ruling out further strike action.
Consultants and junior doctors have organised strike action. We've coordinated between the committees in the past. I'm not going to rule out any particular form of industrial action in the future, but I'm not talking about consultants taking industrial action at the moment. I want to emphasise that we want to get around the table and speak to the government, not strike.
A court has heard that a baby girl died because her, quote, selfish parents put their desire to keep her above her well-being. The trial of Constance Martin and Mark Gordon has been told they went off-grid, having had their other children taken into care. The baby was allegedly kept in a bag for life in freezing conditions. Her parents both deny charges, including manslaughter and child cruelty. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says at least 20 people have been killed and 150 wounded after Israeli fire hit a crowd of people waiting for humanitarian aid in Gaza City. The Israeli military says it's looking into the reports. The Home Secretary has defended a delay in bringing in a new law aimed at toughening up a ban on zombie knives. The measures were first announced 5 months ago, but it wasn't until today that legislation was put to Parliament, and the new law will not come into force until September. Speaking to Sky News, the actor and campaigner against knife crime, Idris Elba, had a blunt message. There is enough money in this country to tackle the problem. Sky's Molly Malone reports.
This is a symbolic game with a serious message. A hoop shot for every stabbing victim here in Newham over the last 2 years. Police officers playing sports with those affected by knife violence. An unusual match to raise awareness of an ever more common crime.
I lost a close friend. Then a few weeks later, I lost another friend.
Anthony has seen firsthand how knife crime takes lives and now campaigns for change by encouraging people to play sport and keep off the streets.
When people don't have direction, when people don't have something to do, that's when you see a lot of young people are easily influenced into doing the wrong things. But what it does is by engaging young people, by engaging anybody and allowing them to be and belong into something where it's positive, where they're actually going to gain benefits.
Today's announcement is about these so-called zombie knives. A long blade, often with a serrated edge, a sharp point, and sometimes words or images glamorising the weapon.
We've heard for years how the government want to clamp down on knife crime, and work being done in communities like this one in East London will be intrinsic to their efforts. But loopholes in the law have been exploited, allowing these knives to continue to be used.
As of September, new government legislation will hope to change that. Police will have powers to seize knives found on private property if they suspect it's being used for crime. Previously, they couldn't do that. The definition of a zombie knife will be expanded, while the maximum sentence for possession will increase from 6 months to 2 years.
We have already taken action to make the carrying of zombie knives illegal. When I became Home Secretary, I made the immediate decision to go further. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now, and we'll be determined to get these knives off the streets.
It's a cause actor Idris Elba is campaigning for further action on.
I'm hopeful. A campaign launched at the top of the year. 2 weeks later, we're seeing movement. I want the government to really think about this in a 360 way. I want youth services to be reinstalled and reinvigorated. I want the charities that are doing all of this work for young people to be funded. There's enough money in this country that we can look at this carefully and offer some funding and stability for these organisations.
And it's organisations like this one in Newham that are doing exactly that. And yet the problem, particularly in the capital, still on the rise. Molly Malone, Sky News in Newham, East London.
The so-called war on drugs in the Philippines, carried out by the country's former president, saw thousands of Filipinos executed by police and vigilantes. Now Sky News understands an international arrest warrant for Rodrigo Duterte could be issued within 6 months. Duterte led a brutal crackdown on drugs and is accused of ordering extrajudicial killings allegedly perpetrated by the police and vigilantes. In the years since he took power in 2016, more than 12,000 Filipinos are thought to have been killed. At least 2,500 killings are known to have been carried out by the Philippine National Police, with Duterte and other government officials accused of instigating and inciting the killings. Sky News now understands investigators from the International Criminal Court have visited the Philippines to look into possible crimes against humanity. Our Asia correspondent, Cordelia Lynch, reports now from the capital, Manila. A warning, her report contains images of skeletal remains.
The slums of Manila, where thousands were killed in Duterte's war on drugs. Now Sky News understands the International Criminal Court has been on the ground investigating.
At the height of Duterte's crackdown, the bodies on the streets piled up, killed by vigilantes and police. There is far less bloodshed now, but it hasn't gone away. It's just harder to see.
In the shadows, we meet a hitman. He claims corrupt police still want guns for hire.
Who's asking you to kill?
The police give me an envelope with the money and the photo of the subject. I'll get between 20 and 30,000 pesos per head.
Do you have any kind of guilt about what you're doing?
I want to stop killing, but I'm given the direct order, and if I don't complete the job, I'll be killed.
We can't independently verify his claims, and the police declined a request for comment.
Gunshot wounds to the head.
Dr. Raquel Fortune is examining the exhumed remains of victims with worrying findings.
I have seen death certificates where a doctor somehow signed it out as a natural death. Pneumonia, sepsis, myocardial infarction, and yet he was really shot.
Sarah Solis lost her 2 sons in just 6 months.
Some people say Duterte made the Philippines safer.
No, everyone was put in danger. He's an animal. He has no heart, no mind, no soul.
But Duterte and the police deny any wrongdoing, and his successor says he won't lift a finger to help the ICC. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Manila, in the Philippines.
Now, when the government announced compensation plans for the victims of the post office scandal, the minister said that he wanted to ensure that every victim was fully recompensed for their losses. But that heightened expectation, and it hasn't been matched by reality as compensation letters drop through the letterbox. Sky's Ivor Bennett has more.
He was the post office's poster boy, the youngest postmaster in Britain when he took over his local branch near Sunderland, aged 18. But within 9 years, Christopher Head had lost his job, savings and reputation, and is now among the hundreds seeking compensation. The offer he's received, though, doesn't come close to what he says he's owed.
The department hopes you agree that the offer is fair and reasonable.
It's less than 15% of his claim.
It's what they said it wasn't going to be, which is insulting, you know. The problem is it doesn't even cover the past loss of earnings and things that you've actually lost. Shows, as far as I'm concerned, that they have no intention of putting you back in the position that you would have been in.
It's all a far cry from this.
Our aim is to ensure that every victim is fully recompensed for their losses.
Post Office Minister Kevin Hollinrake, with one of many promises made by the government recently to finally put things right.
I have to say that it appears to be misleading. We can only believe it by the actions that they make. And the actions that they make in my own case and in several others that I've seen is just not happening. So we can only judge them on what we see.
And it's not just what's on offer, but how long it's taking. Christopher had to wait nearly 3 months to receive his first offer, and only now do the negotiations begin. And remember, his is just one of hundreds of cases where compensation's still outstanding. So why is it taking so long to offer the right redress? Labour MP Kevin Jones believes he knows the answer as a member of the Compensation Advisory Board.
It's taken too long because it's bureaucratic, you've got lawyers involved, and you've also got, I think, a tendency still on behalf of the Post Office to be slow at releasing information. And
is there a reluctance too?
Well, I think there is on occasions, and I think the thing we've got to do is ensure that where evidence doesn't exist because someone's been destroyed, for example, we should take the word of the claimant. That would speed it up.
In a statement, the Department for Business and Trade said, if any applicant to the GLO scheme feels that they are owed more than is being offered, they should speak to their legal advisors to appeal their claim. And these cases are overseen by an independent panel that includes legal and accountancy experts. Needless to say, Christopher has already appealed. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
Human remains which were found in a bog in Northern Ireland have been carbon dated to between 2,000 and 2,500 years ago. Police were called after human bones were discovered in peatland last October. Excavators recovered a body that was so well preserved it included skin, fingernails on the left hand and even a kidney. The remains are believed to be from a boy who was between 13 and 17 when he died, but little is known about his cause of death. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the New Statesman's associate political editor Rachel Cunliffe and the former Conservative special advisor Anita Boateng. And among the stories that we will be discussing, this on the front of the Metro. Their headline, No Justice, referring to the Nottingham killer being given hospital detention rather than a prison sentence. We'll be right back. This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. A first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, our top stories. The families of 3 people who were killed by a man with paranoid schizophrenia have said police have blood on their hands for not doing their job properly. The Scottish COVID inquiry has been shown WhatsApp messages in which Nicola Sturgeon described Boris Johnson as a clown. And the US state of Alabama is said to use nitrogen to execute a prisoner for the first time, despite his lawyers arguing that it could result in a prolonged and painful death. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the New Statesman's associate political editor Rachel Cunliffe and the former Conservative special advisor Anita Boateng. Welcome both. And they'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. While responding to the Nottingham killer being given a hospital order rather than a prison sentence, the Metro carries the headline, "No Justice," while the Mirror's headline is, "Nottingham families fury as their loved one's killer is spared a prison sentence." On the front page of The Express, the headline from the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, claiming today's tax cuts are just the start. And in the eye, Sir Keir Starmer is warned by a former member of Tony Blair's cabinet that he must reverse Tory tax cuts or face squeezing public services. While the Daily Mail reports on a mother and her partner who allegedly fled across the country with their newborn in a Lidl bag, who later died. And The Guardian reports on the EU's plans to stockpile key medicines, which they report will in turn worsen record shortages of drugs in the UK. On the front page of the Financial Times, Baroness Michelle Mone and her husband have had their assets frozen by a court as the pair face a fraud investigation. Both deny any wrongdoing. And the Daily Star has a poll on their front page which claims 90% of Britain would refuse a call-up to fight in any war in the future. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Rachel Cunliffe and Anita Boateng. Thank you so much for being with us to go through the front pages. OK, let's start with a story that's both on the front page of the Metro and the Mirror, and our lead story as well. Let's start with the Metro. Families fury at stab spree sentence. OK, well, let's go to the Mirror instead. Nottingham families fury. Grace, Barnaby and Ian were stolen forever, let down by the system meant to protect us all. And the Metro has a headline, "No Justice." And this, of course, is our lead story, those killings in Nottingham. Anita, starting with you, what have you made of it?
It's just been absolutely heartbreaking. What we've seen today is some really personal and heartfelt accounts of the disappointment that the family members feel and their sense of trying to support each other through such a senseless and random attack. And this specific point about the system has really come through very strongly in their criticisms. So it's really about the fact that, Calocane, he was known and had been around the kind of police and mental health system. He'd been sectioned 4 times, and there were instances in which they argue he could have been arrested. Perhaps he wouldn't have had a prison sentence, but that might have made a difference in attempting to deal with this. And then also they have the added pain of the fact that he's not being charged with murder because of his diminished capacity, because, as you said, he was a paranoid schizophrenic, and also is going to be held in a hospital. So I think for them, it's just a desperately, desperately sad day.
Incredibly strong words from the family saying the police have blood on their hands, Rachel.
I mean, this is a horrific story, every aspect of it. You start off with the senselessness of the killings, and then the details emerge of the multiple ways in which the services, public services, failed in this case. And the Mirror headline, "They were failed." As Anita said, there were multiple opportunities to prevent this. There were failings in the probation service because he was known to the police before, in police who didn't follow up, in mental health services. He was known to have this condition. He was known to not always have access to or be taking his medication, and this was a tragedy waiting to happen. With the point about him serving his sentence in a hospital rather than a prison, I cannot begin to imagine what those families are going through, and they obviously feel deeply failed, and they feel as though justice has not been done. I take issue slightly with the Metro's headline of no justice, because a sentence to spend the rest of your life in a mental institution, a mental hospital, getting the treatment that you need for a condition that you will probably never be cured from, that is a form of justice. The tragedy here is that the services were not stepping in, were not able to step in before something this tragic happened.
It would always be, though, a difficult balance to strike, because there is a balance to strike in cases like this. I mean, obviously, when you see what happened, then it goes without saying. But it is a difficult call for the police to make often.
Yes, absolutely. He hadn't had a lot of obviously incidents even close to this nature. He hadn't exhibited the kind of horrific, violent nature which would obviously put you on a different radar with the police. And it is always a judgment, but the key thing is, were there failings as a result of decisions being taken that were finally balanced, or was it a failure to follow up, to communicate and to understand the nature of the problem? From what we read, it looks like it was much more of the latter. And so in these instances, you do get those moments where, for instance, probation are making a difficult decision and they decide on balance they think a prisoner has exhibited the right kinds of behaviours to warrant this kind of response. And then that does sometimes go in an unexpected and tragic direction. It feels like there is more than just that going on, and that there were moments where questions could have been asked about their behaviour, and also particularly the kind of mental health services in their ability to stage an effective intervention here. It looks as though, the people were very badly let down.
OK. Let's go to the Scotsman now. Totally different kind of story. Their headline, government is accused of cover-up on WhatsApp. COVID inquiry, of course. Inquiries told decisions were made by message despite denials. A lot of things coming out of the COVID inquiry in Scotland as well, and some spicy language there as well.
Yes, Scotland is having its own COVID WhatsApp scandal crisis, as we did here in England with Boris Johnson and all of those messages. Some key points that have emerged. One is that when the scandal over Boris Johnson's WhatsApps broke, Nicola Sturgeon claimed that that was an issue that hadn't affected her handling of the COVID pandemic, and that all the decisions were made through the appropriate channels. There has been evidence given by her chief aide, who has demonstrated that actually they were using WhatsApp just as much as anyone else was. The other thing that has come to light through this part of the inquiry is something that the Scottish government was accused of, Nicola Sturgeon's government was accused of at the time and pushed back very hard on, that there was a sense that COVID could be used, or the handling of the pandemic afterwards, to further the cause of Scottish independence and to make it clear that Scotland's handling was better than the Westminster handling, or that Scotland didn't have the powers that it needed to address a pandemic effectively, and that there was a certain amount of politicisation underway. Now, obviously, those involved have pushed back very hard on that, but I think you can see in those WhatsApp messages a sense of, this is what we're dealing with now, how could we use this to our advantage when it's all over?
Yes, and Liz Jones, Liz Lloyd's, apologies, the advisor to Nicola Sturgeon, actually at points explicitly said that point, about using things for advantage. And the thing that is frustrating about what's happened here is that this didn't actually need to happen. Like, once again, to Rachel's point about politicisation, Sturgeon made a particular point of saying, by the way, this was all the UK government's approach. We didn't take this approach. And once again has been found to be hypocritical, and have said, well, obviously, that the idea that one might sort of say, well, I'm not sure about how to approach this, should we stick with 20 as a way to make decisions, was absolutely abhorrent. But in black and white, she's done the exact same thing. And so I quite understand the nature of that kind of criticism of Sturgeon. The broader point I would make, having been behind the scenes in government, is that there are, of course, formal meetings and formal channels. I was not a big WhatsApp user in my day, but you do have conversations outside of formal meetings when things are moving this quickly, where you have to be, and you are fairly informal. What did you make of that meeting? Oh, I wasn't convinced by X or Y. What are you thinking, this or that? And WhatsApp is slightly the substitute for that. And I think that in a way, it's very difficult for bereaved families to see that some of these decisions were made very quickly on gut instinct because there was nobody else in charge to make those decisions and they had to be made. And so I think that there is a legitimate and very important criticism of Sturgeon, first of all, of politicising this and seeing this as an opportunity for her, which I think actually did let down some of the handling of the response and the degree of confidence that they gave to both the Scottish and people in England and Wales and Northern Ireland about the handling, but also setting herself up in this way by saying, of course, we would never do the same, really undermines trust in politics and also damages the SNP.
Because she would have known when she made those criticisms of the UK government that she'd made it in exactly the same way, and she probably would have known, given the pressure on key UK government officials to hand over their WhatsApps, that the same demands would be made of her. So she's known to be quite a savvy political operator, at least up until now.
So why do you think...
what was the thought process going through her head?
She thought that there were no... Well, part of the whole issue is the fact that Sturgeon's WhatsApps are not here. Like, there are some from certain dates.
Did she do a factory reset on her phone?
I do think that there was an element of this, that maybe they thought there was less information that would reach the public domain. I mean, even Liz Lloyd, her key advisor, the WhatsApps available are only from September of 2020, which is quite late in the game.
Yeah, a lot of factory resets going on in the country.
It seems to be losing messages right, left and centre, and I can tell you mine are here from 2020.
OK, let's look at a story and two, I guess, different angles to it in a way. Daily Express, we can pull up now, and the headline there, Jeremy Hunt, today's tax cuts are just the start. You'd never know it's an election year. And then the Eye, which says, Keir Starmer, Labour's tax trap. Starmer warned he must reverse Tory tax cuts or squeeze UK public services. OK, so, Rachel, let's start, first of all, with the Express and Hunt saying that today's tax cuts are just the beginning.
Well, the autumn statement in November, Jeremy Hunt announced a cut in national insurance, and usually changes to the tax code would kick in from April, the start of the tax year. But no, it's going to kick in from January. Most people get paid tomorrow or Monday, and we're going to see the benefits of those tax cuts in our pay slips from that point. And why would they do that? Why would they start it in January rather than in April? It's so people have time to feel the benefits and to give Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt the credit for having more money in their pocket, even though the government has frozen the tax thresholds, which means people are actually paying more tax, even though there's inflation and the cost of living crisis, which means everything's more expensive. I don't think the majority of people will be feeling significantly wealthier because of this, and I don't think they'll be giving Hunt and Sunak the credit that perhaps they hoped they'd get with this actually very expensive tax cut, and because of that you're going to see more tax cuts to come in the March budget, trying to get across the sense that the Conservative government is doing something for you, but I think it probably will be too little too late.
Anita, your thoughts and also the Starmer line?
Well, I mean, the reality is that, yes, we're in an election year, but the public finance statement from a few days ago is interesting because the expectation was that maybe you would have around £11 billion worth of spending. It was actually at 7.8 billion, so there might be some headroom here. And it's clear that the Conservatives are framing this election as one of being about who do you think is going to control taxes for you. And if you look at what, Starmer's got on the front of the Eye, the broad narrative the whole year is going to be people giving strategic advice on the front of newspapers like this. But they're saying the point, which is like, reverse these tax cuts. And that is the framing that this government is hoping to go into an election with.
Okay. Go on very quickly.
Well, just the idea that there is extra money for tax cuts is based on very, very deep cuts to departmental spending in health, in education, in justice, departments that have already been cut significantly over the last 14 years. So it's kind of an illusion to say that there is this free cash that we can hand out for tax cuts. Like, nobody in those departments actually believes that is the case. It's a fiction that we're all expected to believe because handouts in an election year.
Rachel, Anita, stay with us. We'll be back in a second. Coming up, a mother who ignored pleas to make sure that her son was given the MMR jab is now urging parents to get their children vaccinated. We'll discuss that next.
To be honest, when I started, it wasn't really about any particular end goal. It was just this really cool, new thing to do. I was obviously a big Usain Bolt fan at the time, so there was a part of all feeling like, oh, I'm a sprinter just like him.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to thank God for great people around you. My really good friend, Ben, I mean, I was quick at school and that kind of thing, and he was like, look, you've never given this thing a go. What are you waiting for? Give it a go. And that was literally how I got into it.
Yeah. And here you are, you run sub 10 seconds
yes, ma'am.
In this event. You reached the semi-finals at the World Championships. As I said, ranked 4th on the British 100 metres all-time list with 9.93. To qualify for the Olympics, what have you got to do? Because looking at that, you're within touching distance.
Amen. Yeah, so you got to run qualifying times 10 flat. You know, the small matter of going to our national championships
Smash
and
that, yeah.
small matter of going to the national championships and coming in the top 2, top 3, and then yeah, job done, sealed. I had to work full time because you know you got bills, life, mortgage, nursery payments. Yeah. I'm in a situation now where I can see my coach a little bit more. But look, people may look at it and think, isn't that a distraction? How on earth can he balance the two things? I very much look at it as a competitive advantage, in the sense that. Look, I also feel like I'm flying the flag for civilians, normal people working a 9 to 5, letting them know that, look, it's all possible, you know what I mean? You have a little bit of faith, a little bit of belief, whatever hidden talents that you're sitting on, you know what I mean? Whip it back out and go after it.
Ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
That's what I'm flying the flag for. You know what it is? It's going to sound massively cliche, but you just take that first step.
Yeah.
And then the next one will take care of itself, and then the next one, and the next one, and then before you know it, you're tearing down the athletics track by the sub 10 seconds and 100 metres. You know, but no, it's honestly as simple as that. You'll never know if you never try. I think it's like a dream beyond a dream. It'd be mega. I often joke that I'll get the Olympic rings tattooed on my forehead, and that'll probably be the end of my corporate career. Just because it'd be that kind of, but yeah, I think it would be a great sort of impactful, inspirational kind of story. I'm not a gatekeeper of any sort, so I just love to share and hope that it will catch someone, inspire someone. But no, it would be mega. So God willing, we can make that happen.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's US correspondent.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. I'm playing devil's advocate. Mark Stone, Sky News in the United States.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview. Still with me, Rachel Cunliffe and Anita Boateng. OK, let's go to a story that I think we're all going to be quite passionate about. A Metro Page 4. Measles nearly killed baby Levi after mum hesitated to get jab. And this is a mother who didn't initially give her son the MMR jab, and then he nearly died of measles. Anita.
Yes, and this is a really important story because we're seeing the cases of measles rise all actually across the world, partly because we travel so much post-COVID. The UK's had to, have an emergency incident called over this, a national incident, because of the numbers of cases that we're seeing. And let's be very clear. I mean, so he obviously had complications due to a severe case of sepsis, but measles can cause disability, blindness. It can obviously cause death, seizures. It's a very serious disease. And there is this pernicious social media story about how it's linked to autism that has meant that we are seeing hundreds and ridiculous numbers of parents choosing not to get their kids vaccinated. And it is causing loss of life.
Because it's the MMR jab.
Yes, it's the MMR jab. And I think this is incredibly important. And even this, I'm slightly frustrated that in the story, the mother says, I get the fear around vaccinations. I don't. I think vaccinations are saving people's lives, and we have to be really very clear about the repercussions of this kind of thing. Most people go and trust their doctor when they say you need X or you need Y. Vaccinations are exactly the same. If you're not a doctor, get your child vaccinated. Even if you are, get your child vaccinated.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is that the fear around the MMR jab is due down to a debunked fake study from the 90s. Yeah, and it's been decades, and I think one of the reasons that the fear around it still persists is that we don't see measles very often, so people have an idea that it's just like a bad version of chickenpox. It can be deadly. It can leave children with lifelong disabilities, and the reason that we haven't been seeing cases of measles is because there were high rates of vaccination. Now those rates have gone down. It's much more dangerous, and we're seeing what experts are ruling could be an epidemic.
Yeah, and of course it's the more vulnerable children that then end up being more at risk. OK, as a final story for this segment from the Daily Star, which have an interesting front page, but sort of a serious point. So as military top brass call for a citizens' army to face down who they call Mad Vlad, 90% of us say that we would refuse to fight. I mean, what do you make of the whole conscription issue? And I guess the fact that most of us would refuse to fight. But I guess if we were at war, we might change our minds.
Well, yes, but I think, you know, what's interesting about this, and I think there's some other papers cover the survey too, I think it's fascinating that 1 in 3 would unquestionably join a war effort. Like, most people don't, at the moment, most of the reasons people give for why they wouldn't fight was partly like, I'm not trained and I think the army should do it. So I think if we had a proper culture of conscription and training and all the rest of it, those numbers might look different. But I imagine most people are just being fairly practical and being like, I don't think I would be that useful in a war. And interestingly, obviously part of the challenge we've seen in Russia, when they were fighting the more defensive part of the operation, was the low morale, lack of expertise, etc.
Defections.
The defections, mothers at home absolutely bereft because you had conscription. So I actually think it's just not the answer, as well as people being quite practical. Final point, sticking up for Gen Zs. The 18 to 24 Gen Zs are the group that were most likely and willing to join the national effort. So there we go.
I'm shocked by that, because I would have assumed it was the boomers who were all born in the 50s when they weren't involved in the war effort, but who seem to think that they were, and seem to think that, you know, young people today should go off. Sure, but the way that you will hear some, obviously not an entire generation, but some commentators, particularly of that generation, talk about younger people is, you know, they just need to fight in a good war, serve their country like we did. And you're like, you didn't, though. You very obviously didn't. So I think it's very uplifting to see that actually the youngest generation is the one that is most patriotic. Boomers, step up.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that anyway. Rachel and Anita, for the moment, thank you. And now let's take a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, after the recent stormy weather, the next few days will be more settled and mainly fine. Most places will start Friday windy and dry, but there'll be a scattering of showers, some wintry in the north. There'll also be plenty of sunshine through the morning, but northern parts will see further showers, especially Scotland. They'll be heavy in places with a risk of hail, thunder and hail snow. The strong wind will ease, but it'll be a little colder than today. The afternoon will be largely fine too, but blustery showers will continue across northwest Scotland, while taking over more of Western Ireland. Most places look dry on Saturday with some hazy sunshine.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And coming up next on Sky News at 11, the families of 3 people killed in Nottingham last year say true justice has not been served as their killer is sentenced for manslaughter.